clean, fresh sound. And this is your It's Your Turn program. Remember, It's Your Turn is an interactive program, so the numbers to call are 457 9997 if you're calling from a local landline, 532 9997 if you're calling from a digital cell phone. And you can also send us a message or call us on WhatsApp at 457 9997. The It's Your Turn program is being hosted by Mr. Cecil Ryan and Mr. Joel Providence. Good morning to you, Cecil.
Good morning to you, Karen, and good morning to Joel, who's still settling in. And Philbert is not going to be with us this morning, but we are happy that you're tuned in. And we want to welcome you, as usual, all our listeners on the WEFM platforms, and the listeners on the Star FM and Garifuna, and all the folks who are listening to us on all the various platforms. Good morning to you. And welcome to another edition of Issue at Hand. We have a very special and distinguished guest this morning. We'll introduce him and start our program on the main discussion topic in a while. But as usual, of course, my colleagues have to greet you. Joel?
Yeah, good morning, Cecil. Kieran, good morning, Cinnamons and Green Beans. It's a great month of the year, the month of May.
I suspect it's your birthday. Yeah, I mean your birth month.
Yeah, well, it just so happens that is what my parents told me.
All right.
Yes, and that is what, if you check at the registry or in my passport, it would indicate something like that. But it's a great month. And actually some of our, not that I'm putting myself in that category, but some of our leaders were actually born in the month of May, inclusive of the late great Ebenezer Theodore Joshua. And we have the spiritual Baptist holiday coming up as well.
That's
right.
So
anyhow, it's good to be here. Lots of good things to talk about. And I look forward to participating in the discussion this morning.
Well, Joel, we don't have a lot of time with our guest this morning. As you know, we have limited time because he has to leave on another engagement, I think, or at least leave to go someplace. But we are very pleased and happy to have with us this morning, seeing that we're going to be discussing the elections that took place in Trinidad this past week here. We want to look at that today, and we have chosen to ask a very distinguished, very well experienced Caribbean pollster and social scientist to be with us this morning, in the person of Peter Wickham. And Peter is joining us via video link, and he's there now. We want to just give us a warm welcome to Peter. Peter, good morning and welcome to the program.
Morning, gentlemen. Good to be with you. So my first time chatting with you. Joel and I are old friends.
Okay.
It looks as though he's back in St. Vincent and the Grenadines now. I think he was further afield for a while. So one way or the other, it's good to chat. And also, happy birthday, Joel. Good to hear that you're celebrating.
Well, I don't think it's his birthday. It's the
It's
month.
his birthday. Oh, it's birth month. I see.
No, but it can begin today if you want to.
Okay. All right. But it's not celebration. Yeah, but gentlemen, I'm happy that you had me on the program. I think that the election outcome in Trinidad and Tobago is of particular interest to Vincentians this year, because you're probably going to go into an election this year, and but maybe we can get into the conversation. But St. Vincent is really very special in the context of Caribbean elections, and I think that this last one is one that we can learn a lot from. So I'm happy to be with you, and hope that I'm hoping that I can stay with you at least for the first hour. So that should be
okay. That's good. So, Joel, you want to take the first baton, or you want me to go?
Okay, I will begin by asking. But certainly good to have you on the program, and I trust that our listeners would benefit a great deal from your expertise and experience in political elections in the Caribbean. My first question directed to you has to do with what the polls were saying prior to the Trinidad and Tobago elections. And we were hearing by and large they're going to be close. One poll said that the election result is probably going to be 21-20 or 23-19, but close. It wasn't absolutely clear. And you couldn't say how it was going to swing in the end. But as we know the results now, you would not classify them as being close at all. This is not the first time that has been happening in regard to predicting elections in the Caribbean. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that. First of all, were the polls wrong?
Mhm.
And then secondly, if they were wrong, why were they so wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a good place to start because that's the question that everyone asks me. Let me just state for the purposes of transparency that I did polling in Trinidad and Tobago last time in the election leading up to 2020. I didn't do any polls this time around in Trinidad and Tobago, so I am speaking with reference to what I have seen. There was one published poll that I saw, which is a professor from UWA, who is not one of the more experienced pollsters in the region, but he has been doing polling in Trinidad and Tobago of late. He was predicting, he didn't predict a seat count, but he did a poll of the marginals, and it showed that the UNC had a commanding lead in the marginals, but that it was trailing in Tobago. UNC was trailing in Tobago. As it worked out, the PNM was leading in Tobago, but was trailing on the mainland in those marginals. As it worked out, the marginals prediction was pretty much correct, and the prediction in relation to the Tobago was incorrect. That the PNM actually lost Tobago. Um, the challenge that I continue to have with polling in the Caribbean is that people see American polling and they believe that the Caribbean polling operates in much the same way. And I'm always fascinated by it because, as I always say to people, the big difference in terms of polling in the United States of America is that it's done by the media, it's done regularly. You have tracking polling, and you're able to see with the outcome what is likely to happen. And then you even have exit polling that happens on the day. None of that goes on in the Caribbean. So invariably, you have to hear what happens. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's even worse because the newspapers don't publish polls unless they get them from a source like myself. But they don't commission polls. And my concern continues to be that the science of polling in the Caribbean is handicapped by virtue of the fact that the person who owns the data determines whether or not they want it released. And of late, my interaction with clients has suggested that polling should perhaps be private and not public, simply because it appears to affect the outcome of elections. So we had an election in 2013 where the polls were saying that there will be a win for the Barbados Labour Party in Barbados. There was a win for the Democratic Labour Party, a narrow win for the Democratic Labour Party. And that was the outcome. And of course, everyone was anxious. So the polls were wrong. The polls were wrong. The reality of the polls were right, because the polls were predicting a victory within a 5% margin of error, and ultimately the election was won within a 5% margin of error by the other side. The other factor that is important is that in my research, certainly based on what I've seen from the United Kingdom and whatnot, I've seen that polling actually influences people's vote, and it influences people's determination to vote in a significant way, not just to say that they're going to vote for the winner, but in many instances, whether they decide to turn out or not. So, for those reasons, political parties have an interest in not having polls published. And you really only have newspaper polls to rely on. So within that conversation, the only newspaper polling that was published was a poll that was done. I forget the name of the professor in Trinidad, and he suggested that the UNC was winning the marginals, and that was correct. The UNC did win the marginals. The thing with what he was predicting is that you could say there was a comfortable win for the UNC in the marginals. If you win all the marginals, then it looks as though you swept the election, and ultimately that's what happened. So, for all intents and purposes, his polls were right. It maybe people just didn't understand the degree. Um, the polls that predicted a narrow victory, that predicted a neck and neck situation, is NACTA, who is, in my opinion, not the preferred pollster in the Caribbean. NACTA often speaks eloquently in relation to what's likely to happen, but he doesn't publish a lot of data, and you don't really get access to see what his cross tabulations were and things of that nature. So I am not personally inclined to rely heavily on what he says, but he did say that it would be a narrow victory. The PNM said that their internal polling was saying that there was going to be a narrow victory by them and that it was a neck and neck. But that, again, is not something that we have access to because we don't know what the details of that polling were. So my summary position is that I'm comfortable with the public polling that I saw within the confines of what is likely to be the case. And my own estimations as to what was likely to happen had nothing to do with polling. It had to do with the my assumptions based on the history, certainly the poll data that I saw in the last election. And one of my critical factors was that Kamla Persad-Bissessar polled badly in the poll I did in 2020, which is the election that she lost. And the feeling was that the UNC was handicapped by her in the way that the PNM was also handicapped by Keith Rowley. Keith Rowley essentially created an opportunity by putting a younger person at the helm of the PNM. And based on that, my assumption is that the negatives of Kamla Persad-Bissessar would not have allowed her to win an election in a situation where there was a younger, more energetic leader. One of the things that people didn't like about Kamla Persad-Bissessar is that she was old, 73 years old. My thing is that that would not have changed. So I was saying to people on the basis of it, there were not a lot of good reasons why the PNM should have lost the election because those factors which I identified from my polling were still present. It's clear that the election operated on several different bases. One of them was that the popularity of Keith Rowley appeared to transfer to Stuart Young. Stuart Young had some negatives which he was not able to reverse within a short space of time. And then in the final analysis, it appeared as though a lot of people decided, look, you know, excuse me, Kamla Persad-Bissessar has negatives, but ultimately the downward decline of the PNM was a far more significant factor that people weighed in the final analysis. So I'm sorry that I'm so long-winded, but there's a lot to say in relation to what happened. But I don't really know that it's about polling. The other thing I wanted to say was that when I polled the 2020 election, I polled it earlier, well over a month before the election was held, probably even 2 or 3 months before the election was held. This is during COVID. The outcome showed that the PNM would have won comfortably. The actual outcome was that the PNM won less comfortably. My experience with polling in the Caribbean is I always tell people that a poll probably has a shelf life of about a month. I refine that further to suggest that a poll probably has a shelf life of a week or two. And I've seen in different countries where that reality changes. So you poll it in 6 months, and then 6 months later, you find that the reality changes. But yeah, still people are telling you, yeah, but your poll said this. And my thing is, yeah, your poll said this 6 months ago. And the snapshot changes over time because the reality changes. So those are some of the challenges that pollsters face trying to predict Caribbean elections. And I think that we are compared unfavorably with our counterparts in America that have the benefit sometimes of daily polling. So you do a poll Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you can watch the movement. I mean, in our case, we don't have the capacity to do that. You would probably get one or two bites of the cherry during the election, and you have to make your predictions based on that. Joel knows the environment quite well, so he can attest to the veracity of what I'm saying, I believe. I don't know if he remembers his days as a pollster, but
So Peter, we had a margin of 26-13-2 in terms of the UNC, the PNC, and the Tobago seats. Now there was, according to the reports, there was 54% turnout, which was low, which was considered low. What accounted for that low turnout?
You see, that's the other thing that I think we have to take into consideration. My polling, I don't know about anybody else, is Professor Ryan, Salman Ryan, Professor. Well, as I said, I can speak to my own
Yes.
polling. I don't know about anyone else's. It is better at predicting electoral swing, and I use electoral swing fairly heavily. What I found is that you're very, very unable to predict electoral turnout. And the peculiar thing about the election in Trinidad and Tobago is that it was a turnout election. It was an election in which the outcome was based on a voter turnout that was low and a voter turnout that negatively impacted the PNM almost across the board, but particularly in PNM strongholds and particularly in the marginal. So in other words, people decided not that they will vote for the UNC, but they will withhold their support for the PNM. And where they do that in large enough numbers, then you get a reverse effect, in that the swing towards the UNC appears exaggerated, and that's done by virtue of the voter turnout. Polling does not predict that, and my polling cannot predict that, and it cannot predict it simply because many times people decide on the day of the election that they will not vote for various reasons, and in many instances, we don't have the opportunity after to understand. Now, one of my analyses have suggested that a number of people who don't vote because they believe a particular outcome is likely and they don't want to support it, or alternatively, they're comfortable with it one way or the other, or they don't believe they can make an impact, and as a result, they can't be bothered to go out. My sense in this instance, and this is something that I plan to go into by looking at the data, is that this is a landslide election that was caused largely because PNM supporters grew frustrated and they withheld their support. The support for Stuart Young was negatively impacted by the fact that a number of persons within the PNM seem to have preferred Penelope Beckles. Now, there's a race factor in there because Penelope is black, Stuart Young is Indian Chinese, but Stuart Young is also a very wealthy young man and is seen to be part of the privileged class in Trinidad and Tobago, the 1%. Well, Penelope Beckles appears to be slightly more, more real in terms of her representation of the vast majority of people in the population. So the voter turnout appears to have been the most significant factor, and it's something that polling couldn't predict. And I think that when I do complete my analysis, it probably will confirm that the voter turnout was negatively affected by the fact that a number of PNM supporters felt they chose the wrong person. So they chose Penelope instead of, they chose Stuart Young instead of Penelope Beckles. People felt she was the wrong person. And as a result, they said, well, we will stay home. We can't support the PNM on this occasion. And if they lose, they lose. And that's exactly what happened. But the fact that the voter turnout was not only low, but lower than it was in 2020, and bear in mind that 2020 was a COVID election. 2020 was one of the lowest turnouts across the region, in St. Vincent as well, because of the fact that it was so difficult for people to gather to vote in the COVID environment. Um, to have an election turnout even lower than that speaks huge volumes about the level of interest that people wanted to take, or disinterest. And my sense is that the disinterest had a lot to do with the fact that people weren't in the PNM. They were less inclined to come out and support this guy Stuart Young. Which is a pity for him because he was a young person, but it also said that they made a bad choice. Now, I I was not a huge fan of Stuart Young initially, largely because of the posture he took during COVID. But it's clear that there was something about him that Keith really liked, and I couldn't understand what it was. And I thought that maybe Keith Rowley liked him because Keith Rowley had polling that showed that he was doing better. And I was told from time to time that yes, he did have poll data that showed that he was a stronger candidate, more likely to win. Which means that if Penelope Beckles was leader, they probably would have lost to or and equally as badly. But that's something that we can't really quarterback Monday morning. We have to have a sense of what really was the real reason that people or if she would have improved their chances. Keith Rowley would have us believe that the problem was neither Penelope Beckles nor Stuart Young. The problem was him, and that people were fed up of him and they voted against him. There's a lot of support for that theory as well, that it was an anti-Rowley vote, and that's what people voted against. But my sense is that to make PNM supporters stay at home, yeah, it's gonna be challenging.
But was that one of the campaign approach used by the UNC to make PNM supporters stay home?
I don't think that they did it. What they probably did is they frustrated PNM supporters. My sense is the campaign did a couple of things. They identified two key issues: crime and the economy, cost of living and crime. Interestingly enough, those are probably going to be the two main issues in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines election, because they were the two main issues in the United States election. There were the issues in the Cayman Islands election that just came off. Essentially, those are the issues in the elections across the region right now. The one they had in the BVI the other day, there was Anguilla. It was the issue there. So they isolated those two issues and they hammered them. They hammered them by saying that the populist position that Kamala Prasad was taking against crime is that she felt the solution to crime was to put a gun in every household and give householders the ability to shoot back. It's absolute
Yes.
madness.
So load your Glock. Have your
Yeah,
Glock loaded.
I found it a disturbingly offensive approach, but I guess I have less of an interest in guns than most people. I cannot see that as a responsible approach because you put more guns in every household, you're also going to put more guns in the hands of the few criminals that don't have them in the first place. So that was her approach, but the
Sounds
populace
very
response.
Trumpish.
Yeah, it was very Trumpish, right? And then she took Trumpist positions in relation to other things. So she was anti-woke and all that type of thing. She was all up in that, and I thought that was to appeal to a section of the population. And then in relation to the economy and the cost of living, she said, "Look, I'm gonna make things better. I'm gonna slash VAT. I'm gonna put more things in the basket of thing. I'm going to step back property tax, which is something that was new." And it's all of these types of things which she felt. No, what she did was she said to PNM supporters, areas where they are failing, I can succeed. And PNM supporters were then left with the question of, look, your dislike for Kamala Prasad is it so intense that you should come over and support. I think what they decided to was they come halfway. They said, well, we ain't gonna support her, but we can stay home. And then she continued to hammer the negatives of Rowley. So they essentially didn't give Stuart Young a chance to emerge. The election presented Rowley as being the man in the driver's seat, which was not helped by virtue of the fact that he was still the political leader of the party. So in a sense, you're saying Keith Rowley phase two, and that's what she essentially presented. So anti-Rowley campaign, Stuart Young is a reflection of him, and then you had on the other side there's two issues that she was essentially hammering: crime and the cost of living. And I think the effective is that people stayed home. So that was I would say that all in all was the basic, the two things that she did that helped to encourage people to stay home.
If I may add or ask a question and make a comparison with events here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines back in 2000. One is that Rowley's popularity was waning, of course, as we all know, and that they felt that Rowley and the PNM they were not grounded with the people, especially in their traditional areas across the eastern main road and from Tunapuna, well, as far as Laventille and below and Philbert and so forth. And that is where in the north that PNM was grounded. And then even down in the south, places like Labre and Point Fortin and so forth, that the PNM was waning there because they felt that Rowley not only seemed to be associated himself with the 1%, from which you said that Stuart Young came, but he was making arrogant statements that showed that he had distanced himself. And now the question I raise now that makes a comparison with St. Vincent Grenadines is that even though that the average Trinidadian got an opportunity to educate themselves at little or no cost through the PNM government and a number of other things that took place, they felt that they were still to some degree, particularly the Afro-Trinis, as they call themselves, were somewhat marginalized and ostracized. They still weren't getting the kind of positions that they wanted, and that the Indo-Trinidadians were the ones still occupying the places of power along with the French Creoles. And it came at a time when Rowley, for his pension, he gets $87,000. When persons felt that with the cost of living, as you mentioned, as one of the key issues and so on, along with crime, that's why they were not making any progress. And here it is that Rowley and his 1% cronies, including Coleman but and others, that were doing quite well. And it came back to 2000 in St. Vincent when it was stated clearly that public servants can't get a salary increase and so forth. and the government of the day wanted to do so much for members of the party, including senators and so forth. And I'm just wondering whether or not the lack of sensitivity to the interests of the average Trinidadian who supported the PNM for many years, whether or not that accounted to a significant extent for the margin of defeat experienced by the PNM.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an excellent point that you're making. This idea that Rowley became distant, Rowley has never really been a particularly grassroots person, right? I mean, the Keith Rowley that I know is a PhD in I think it's
Geology.
geology.
Yes.
Yeah, and Rowley has always played golf, and he's a very black individual, and I use him black in the more cultural sense, in that he beats steel pan, and he does things like that which are very populous. He jump up in carnival, take off his shirt, and he drink rum and that kind of thing. But Rowley has always been a very posh person. The Keith Rowley that I know and I've seen, as I said, he's comfortable on the golf course. Keith Rowley has never really been a person that one could say wallows in this working class environment. Your Prime Minister, Ralph Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez has always been a person who appears very, very at home among the working classes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I think that, in a sense, he has a lot of Mia Motley in him, or Mia Motley has a lot of Ralph Gonzalez in there. People who are clearly not poor, but people who walk comfortably among poor people. I don't know that Keith Rowley has ever had that, right? So the idea that he only now became that kind of snobbish person is entirely untrue. And in the case of Stuart Young, I don't think Stuart Young was ever given an opportunity to demonstrate that he was that person. Now, I look back at Patrick Manning. Again, Patrick Manning, I've never really gotten a sense that Patrick Manning moved so comfortably among the working classes. So this whole idea that Keith Rowley became aloof is something that I struggle with. Keith Rowley has been the same way from the time he came into politics. He represents an area in Diego Martin, which is relatively middle class. So there wasn't really a need. But the issue I think that changed was that Keith Rowley under his government did a lot of things which impacted negatively on the working classes. Let's look at Petrotrin, right? Petrotrin is a state-owned corporation that essentially refined gas. Now, one of the interesting things with the Eric Williams approach is that Eric Williams wanted to chase out all the multinationals. So he essentially would have set up Petrotrin back in the day when there was a need to have a state agency that was refining oil and gas and producing petrol. What we have found, what they found with Petrotrin was that Petrotrin became highly inefficient. They used to have strikes frequently. People, the staff there was going on strike regularly. Their profits were way down compared to a private entity like BP that was, making millions and millions of dollars and generating considerable tax for the public purse, while Petrotrin was essentially a drag on government. He closed it, but in closing it, he also alienated a lot of people who worked there and got paid well for doing very little. And a lot of people felt that that was a slap in the face. The other thing was that fuel in Trinidad and Tobago, electricity were all subsidized. He rolled back a lot of those things. And a lot of people found that was also offensive to the working classes because people like the idea of cheap fuel. And I used to have this argument with Trinidadians all the time. Any government that says they're going to subsidize fuel long term is a government that is entirely at sea regarding the realities, because you cannot subsidize fuel. It was tried in Antigua, they did it in Barbados for a while, but I don't know what's the position with the government in St. Vincent regarding a fuel subsidy. But a fuel subsidy has of necessity to be short term, because unless you are producing fuel and selling it, you're dragging down the economy. And in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, they were selling fuel for a fraction of the cost, which they could have sold it externally and gotten. So you could generate foreign exchange for fuel and you're selling it cheap locally. And the more you sell, the more you lose. So those kinds of the conversations that Keith Rowley attempted to have, that Patrick Manning didn't attempt to have, and that leaders before, and certainly that Basdio Pandey didn't attempt to have, or Kamla Prasad Assessor didn't attempt to have. And that's part of the reason why people feel that he alienated the working class. You know, he had the CPEP program, which is people working really in the roads or whatnot. That wasn't really disturbed. But the big things that I saw were the introduction of property tax. That alienated a lot of people because, again, Trinidadians live in a world where they don't know what paying property tax is. The rest of us understand that property tax is something you have to pay. You own property, you pay a tax on it. Those guys, I have friends in Trinidad and Tobago whose family is unaware of the quantity of land that they have in various places simply because they've never had to pay tax on it. So they don't need to quantify. So they say, oh, we got a piece of land in Tobago. We must go and see it one of these days, right? I don't have that luxury because if I got a piece of land, I know because every year I get a tax bill, I got to pay, right? So it costs them nothing to maintain it. So many times people don't really care, they don't really know. Keith Rowley was dealing with that. So it's these kinds of unpopular but practical policies. Keith Rowley wanted to right-size the government. He wanted to do away with the inefficient petrotrend. He was looking at a gas deal with Venezuela, which collapsed. I think that was also a major contributor.
Yeah, the
But
dragon,
Dragon deal, yeah.
dragon
But
deal.
the model of saying I'm going to generate good revenue from selling oil and I'm going to use it to give away to people to make me popular with the working classes is a model that the PNN lived on. That model was disrupted by Keith Rowley's attempt for efficiency. And I think that that would have been a huge factor. Now, I don't know that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is going to be in a similar situation because I think that the Gonzales model has always been it's been relatively consistent and I don't think it's going to change. And you know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines never had a lot of that, so you don't have these huge public subsidies propping up entities which are inefficient. And as far as salaries and wages are concerned, I think that the pension with the prime minister was probably a storm in the teacup. You know,
So, so,
it's not that big a deal, but it was made a big deal of because there was a lot of other things going on.
so Peter, the question of the management of the economy was a big factor in the Trinidad election.
Yeah. It was a huge factor, but again, not in the way that people thought. My sense is that there was a responsible management of the economy under Keith Rowley. There was an assumption that things had to be managed because the oil and gas has to be managed. The Dragon deal is a perfect example of that because it was a mature way of saying we have the infrastructure to liquefy natural gas, but we're running out of natural gas. Let's take it from Venezuela because it's right across the road. And let's use our resources to liquefy the natural gas, and we have a pipeline from here to Venezuela that would deal with it. Those are the kind of mature decisions that they took. I don't see that maturity. You know, when you look at Kamla Prasad-Assess's proposals, which are populist and say they will make things cheaper by, I mean, if you remove about 20% of goods or how much ever percent she said from tax, you're cutting government's revenue significantly. And in addition to that, you're not looking at property tax, so you're cutting government's revenue even further. What exactly are you going to get revenue from? Your oil and gas revenue is going to be down because you're running out of natural gas. So I'm saying that there's a level of responsibility which one had and the other didn't, but people ultimately didn't vote for that. They said, look, I voted for my pocket. You know, I'm looking at the fact that things hard and I voted for my pocket because I can't deal with how hard things are. You know,
Kamla,
Trinidadians waste, and this is a thing that fascinates me. Trinidadians waste so much electricity. Yeah? There are people who leave the air conditioner on and go in town and come back, and they don't think about it because that's the way that they have always been. But yet, still, you know, they complain when the government says we're going to cut the subsidy on fuel, which means then that your electricity bills are going to go up. They don't get the connection between the two, and that's something that I've always been fascinated by.
Kamla Prasad is 73 or thereabout.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that leave the question? And she was elected. Where does that leave the conversation on age?
That's a good question. I really don't know what the answer is. I mean, look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump
Exactly.
is considerably older than she is, and I have this idea that well, people should not be in government. I feel that I support term limits. I always have. I've had this conversation face to face with Dr. Gonzalez, and I do not, I support term limits. I believe that a person should be prime minister for 10, maybe 15 years, and then it should change to someone not necessarily younger in age, but younger in politics. Um, Having said that, we've had old leaders that have done a reasonably good job. Joe Biden didn't do a bad job, contrary to popular belief. And he was considerably old when he was able to get the job. Um, in her case, I mean, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you guys understand the reality of an age leader. I mean, Dr. Gonzalez is one of the older leaders in the Caribbean, and he seems to be holding on okay for now. Um, Arguably, his age has helped St. Vincent and the Grenadines considerably as opposed to hindered. So I really don't know. I am essentially at sea in relation to that issue. I'm somewhat divided because it appears as though there's an appetite for it. So maybe they've elected someone at 73. She may decide to run again. I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but if it is that people vote for, who am I to judge? In the words of the Pope.
So
Um,
based on what the only part of your response is, would you disagree with the view that it is a question of the delivery of things that benefit life and living in whatever society it is?
I would say so, yeah.
Hmm.
So if you have an old leader that's populist and that person can speak to those issues, then it appears to work. It seems to work for them. It seems to work.
Yeah, if I may just add to that, age is not in politics is not just a chronological thing in terms of the number of years that from birth to where you are today, but it also takes into consideration your approach towards life and the people and what the people would want today as
Mhm.
well as tomorrow. And that's why, in a sense, some persons, Donald Trump is 79, will be 79 in a
Mhm.
matter of a month or two, and he is going to be around for well, certainly until he's 82, 83. And he's also
Possibly
talking now
longer.
possibly longer. I don't know if he'll get around that, but he's possibly longer and so on. But his approach generally, even like this morning on the television, I say make a comment about Stephen A. Smith, and he would like Stephen A. Smith, I think the popular sports journalist and so on,
Mhm.
to run in the upcoming elections because he's in attuned to the things that the younger folks like,
Mhm.
as opposed to even though as opposed to his opponent Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris in the last election. So it depends very much on your approach, and then in a sense, the age, if you're 73 as opposed to someone who is 63 or 58, sometimes it may not be as significant when you look at the person's approach to life and what the interests of the
Mhm.
electorate.
So Peter,
You're on
in
the ball,
responding,
and
Peter, the UNC basically didn't have a grounding philosophy. Would you say it's all linked to the policies and philosophies of the particular party or parties?
I don't know that policy and philosophy had a lot to do with it because I don't really know that people know the UNC has always been a labor party. It's always been a working class party. It's always been tied to the sugar industry and so on, and the laborers. The ULF is the origin of the UNC, which is United Labour Front. So it has always had a labor orientation. So I would say that that's the grounding philosophy of the UNC. So the idea of them associating with different unions and going forward makes perfect sense, and that is considerably linked to their philosophical orientation. The problem, of course, is that the times that they have been in office, I think the last time they were in office or the times before, they shut down the Carney, which was sugar industry. They closed it down, which was, in a sense, should have been an affront to labor. And they have also been involved in, some major infrastructural projects like the airport and so on, and the when they started to build the methanol plant, that was a UNC initiative, which don't really have a lot to do with labor. So this idea of philosophy is something I think is very I don't know that it really excites people unless you can say to them, look, the philosophy is that I'm going to make your life better. It's a short-sighted thing. But I don't know many people that know what the philosophical orientation of both political parties is, and they can say I know one versus the other, and they can articulate it, and that's a challenge across the Caribbean. But when you were talking about age just now, I was saying look at Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Bernie Sanders is an old man that really resonates with young people. Most of his following is young people. I used to
I think we just have a challenge. We just lost Peter. I'm sure he's going to come back in a while. It's a challenge with the technology. Until such time, Joel, and we'll have to keep the discussion going.
Well,
I
yeah,
am not sure.
while we see if we can get it, sorted out, if we can keep the discussion, hopefully he'll come back in. I just I wanted just to cover two questions, and I don't know if I don't think Peter can hear us.
He may be,
but I just wanted to raise two issues, two questions that I wanted to pose to him. One is, and maybe you might have answered the question before, is whether or not.
Oh, that.
I think he's back in now.
Yeah, I saw. I think Tinter dropped out. Yeah, and I
Yes.
was
So,
talking about Bernie versus
Yes.
Bernie Sanders and the fact that he had this really young following, and that's fascinating. And I think that Bernie could have gotten away as a person who was more supportive of age, as you said, Joel, because he was in this business for a shorter period. He wasn't president. But also because he seemed to speak to issues that young people responded well to. And then the other comparison I want to use in the Caribbean in terms of age is, the young Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell, who was a kid for all intents and purposes, that had no exposure to politics. And the fact that he beat someone that was as steeped in politics as
Keith Mitchell.
Keith Mitchell spoke volumes. And one of the issues that they hammered was the fact that Keith Mitchell was old. He had all the classic manifestations of age in that he was not only old chronologically, but he was prime minister for a very long time, and they were able to use that effectively. So it's something that we have to look at creatively, because it's not just about the chronological age. It has to do with the length of time the person is in there, and I think the way in which that is used or relied upon in the context of a conversation. But I missed the second question that came after.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask a question about individual leadership, the individual leader versus the party leadership. Now, and we can go with Dickon Mitchell, for example. He came into the Grenada politics in the month of November, and 5 months, and without persons knowing him very well other than being a decent lawyer. And then 5 months later, he was Prime Minister of Grenada. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's all been these rumblings going back to the earliest stint of Kamla Persad-Bissessar when she was Prime Minister, and that they were saying that she couldn't control a government. There were actually 14 ministers, I think.
Well, she fired 14 ministers.
Yeah, she fired 14 ministers. Was that an indication of strength, or is it an indication of not being able to control the government back then? And then they have these undercurrents and these rumors about Kamala not being in control of all her faculties and so forth. And here she is back in office today as the Prime Minister. The question that I'm posing to you is, could it be one that does it matter too much that you need to have a strong individual leader at the helm, or sometimes the policy, the philosophy, and the collective views and so on of the party, whether or not that also counts? And linked with that is, I just come back and ask you the question, which I believe you answered, was whether or not the PNM was more so voted out, or that the UNC was voted in.
Yeah. I mean, the points you made about Kamla Persad-Bissessar were correct. That Kamla Persad-Bissessar she lost control of the last government. She had a lot of bad eggs in the last government, and she clearly lost the ability to control them. A lot of those characters are still around her, even now. During the course of the election campaign, and that was part of the reason that I personally was surprised that she won, because my thing is that this is the same person, and I haven't really heard anything in the way that she spoke or whatnot to suggest that she made a lot of mistakes, suggesting that she wasn't really in full control, and she put her foot in her mouth on more than one occasion during the election campaign, and it leads one to really wonder. I do think that what happened is people were focused exclusively on the PNM and Keith Rowley and what was wrong. Once you centralize the conversation around what's wrong with Keith Rowley, I don't think that half of the people who voted realize, oops, we elected Kamala Persad-Bissessy. You wake up the next morning and said, my goodness, what have I done? So it was really a vote against and not a vote for. And when I look at the data that suggested that it was a turnout election, my sense is that those not turning out were saying, I cannot vote for Keith Rowley or his successor, his chosen successor at the PNM. As a result, I will stay home and the chips will fall where they may. And against that background, a person like Kamala Persad-Bissessy is able to escape. So I don't know that her leadership is seen as being that strong. I don't believe that people believe that she's washing the blood of the lamb and that she is a different person to the leader that she was before. She still has challenges, and I mean, honestly, I'm somewhat fearful because the confusion will start shortly. You have situations where you had problems. A guy like the former sports minister Anna Roberts, who is my good friend. Well, not a good friend, he's my friend. He's bad, right? And my thing is, the kind of issues you had with him in the past, is this the kind of person that you really need to put back in the cabinet? You put him back in the cabinet again.
He's gotten an even more important ministry, I think.
Precisely than the one he had before he was in sport. Yeah, precisely.
Persons may just say, Peter, is that for persons who do not know Anil Roberts, he has been a commentator on the Sportsmax, on the Olympics, and on other events in recent times. So persons may know him from there.
Yeah, and he was also a very, very strong voice on social media against Keith Rowley, because he used to be attacking Keith Rowley on a personal level. And I mean, when you listen to his posts, a lot of them were blasphemous and attacking him, going after, suggesting that he had affairs and children out of wedlock, and he would say things about Keith Rowley that it was nasty. And my thing is, but this is what has been rewarded. My question is, like, why would you have to do that? And it wasn't as though he was a candidate. You put him in the Senate to give him a ministry, and you expect that he's going to be different. And I mean, I wonder, so I think that we're waiting, collectively holding our bated breath with the expectation that there's going to be confusion short down the road. Now, my concern is that last time around, Trinidad and Tobago had money that it doesn't have now. Trinidad and the rest of the Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines included, is staring down a U.S. recession within the next 6 months, which is going to throw all of us into a tailspin. Because in the final analysis, we are entirely dependent on the U.S. economy's strength. And when prices go up there, we inherit that inflation here. Yes, St. Vincent and the Grenadines produces a lot of its own food, and this is the benefit that you guys have. But anytime you buy a computer, you're going to have to buy it from the US, and the cost will go up. Anytime you buy a phone. So we are going to be impacted negatively by a cost of living crisis. And I'm thinking that it creates a situation where there's not a lot of wiggle room that the Kamala Persad-Bissessy administration will have to make mistakes. So if you have ministers doing foolishness in an environment like that you're going to have in the next 6 months, it's going to be catastrophic. So I really do hope that these guys are different, and they understand that she has to run a tight ship, because the latitude she had last time around, she doesn't have on this occasion, because things are pretty tight. Remember the conversation about the Trinidad and Tobago being the ATM or whatnot? I mean,
yes, the Caribbean.
that's that kind of talk you can't have now, because Trinidad and Tobago itself might need an ATM just now if they're not careful.
Yes, but I noticed when Trinidad, by the way, I don't know about other islands, that their Ministry of Foreign Affairs is actually Ministry of Foreign and the CARICOM Affairs.
Yes, yeah.
They make it very clear that that's the link with the Caribbean. But it's been there for a while, but I'm not so sure CARICOM Affairs is CARICOM in title only, or whether or not there will be this passion towards regional integration, and that they have a very important role to play in forging our our links and make sure that we optimize our resources.
I've always wondered about that reference to CARICOM. I mean, I found it is something that you put in for window dressing, but it's meaningless. CARICOM affairs are conducted between CARICOM prime ministers at a very intimate level, right? The CARICOM leaders have a WhatsApp chat group and they communicate with one another. And to be honest, I think it speaks volumes about our intimacy. So we have an ambassador to CARICOM, but it's a kind of a nice job to have because you don't really have a lot to do. Because if you have issues between St. Vincent and Barbados, they're solved between Prime Minister Motley and Prime Minister Gonzalez.
Right. Rather
And
than
anyone who
David
knows
coming down.
understands, right? So the minister in that conversation is entirely irrelevant. Because the Minister of Foreign Affairs comes in between that. If you're having a St. Vincent issue, the telephone is picked up or the WhatsApp, and there's a communication that goes on, and that's the way it works. So that to me is just window dressing, which is really meaningless because Kamala Persad-Bissessar will conduct foreign affairs, CARICOM affairs with her good friend Mia Motley and Ralph Gonzalez, and that's how it works.
Peter, earlier you identified the question of the cost of living and crime as two important factors that played in the Trinidad election. Were you also linking with that, or where would you put the question of people's living situation insofar as their housing, their job, their health care, and so on and so forth, those kind of things? Where would you locate those things in the analysis?
I would say all of that is part of the cost of living. The inability to receive health care has also been a major issue in many instances because that's linked to the cost of living. Trinidad has a two-tier system where you can go private or you can go public. And the public facilities naturally they're slower, less efficient. You gotta wait long or whatnot. But then if you have money, you can go private. And so that would have naturally come up as an issue. And in instances where you have a greater financial capacity, naturally your health and care would improve. Housing, similarly, is a cost of living issue. The ability to afford either to buy a house or to afford rents, and rents are challenging in many instances. So so I would say that there's a linkage between those, and those are critical cost of living issues: housing, crime. The only thing, sorry, housing, the issue with food, the issue with healthcare. Yeah. The only thing that I don't get a sense that's included in that is education. Education tends to stand alone. And in most cases, education is not an issue in any Caribbean country because it's usually free and it's relatively well taken care of in most of the islands, with just few exceptions.
Yes, but okay, I want to respond to what you just said, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you have said. I always felt that, and I went to school in Trinidad for a while, that there's a tale of two cities. That there are a large section of Trinidadians, they couldn't frequent Movie Town or West Shore Mall and these other places. They had to go and do their shopping on Charlotte Street and Frederick Street and so forth, or someplace in a Rima or in Chaguanas and so forth. Similar in terms of the health. I mean, they have some Sinclair Medical Center, the West Mall, and not the mall, but there's a hospital, a private hospital there, plus in San Fernando. And these facilities are by and large for the 1% or the 1.5%. So, of course, we never got there. That sort of challenge is not as glaring in, say, St. Vincent and the Grenadines and elsewhere. But it's very clear, and it just so happened that the Afro Trinidadians and so forth, those who live up in Lavantil, where many Vincentians
Lavantil is ground zero, right?
Yes, and so on. So you're not going to. So that distinction was clear, and persons could have felt it. Now UNC came back with the slogan that when we win, all we win, kind of thing, and so on. But it sounds good, and I think that their marketing campaign, I think, there was better than and more effective than the PNM. But we will see now what transpires going forward.
I mean, Joe, you're on the ball, and I lived in Trinidad for a couple of years myself, and I worked there a lot more than any other country, so I was to be there a lot, and I agree with you that it's a tale of two cities, and you look at Sinclair Medical Complex versus Port of Spain General. Somebody died in Port of Spain General a few years ago and they didn't realize for about 3 days. You know, it's like
Wow.
it's a horrible place to be. And I appreciate that that's not no, that's always been the case. Kamla Pasabasesa cannot make it so that a person who gets sick in Laventille Hills that ends up in Port of Spain General is treated the same way that they're treated in St. Clair. It just does not work that way. So I appreciate her the idea of the marketing, but it's not going to change. And one of the things I've always liked about countries like St. Vincent and Grenadines, Barbados to a less extent, because we are becoming a bit like that too, is the fact that there's a level of equality where everyone kind of feels it more overall than a situation in which you have this large number of people who are so incredibly wealthy and isolated from all of this, who, as you say, shop differently, eat differently, they go to school differently, they have different schools and everything. That situation with their secondary schooling, and you have prestige schools and non-prestige schools. And that was a huge problem for many years, to the point where if you didn't go to a prestige school, you went to school half day, as though children have different needs based on their poverty level. And that system is still very much in place, even though some efforts have been made to break it down over time. But they do have this idea of, the rich and the poor and the two different systems. And yeah, it's great that she spoke to it. I don't think it will change, but it's something which bothers a lot of people that live there.
Peter, how significant was the vote of the swing voters? How significant was their role in the election?
My sense is that the swing voters were less, based on the data that I am seeing, the swing voters were less impactful than the non-voters.
Okay.
There are not a lot of swing voters in Trinidad, but certainly within the East-West corridor, those would be the ones that were significant. And the fact that they chose to remain at home was essentially the reflection of a swing vote. So I would say the swing voters were less important than the non-voters. The non-voters appeared to be this time to be the greater factor was those who were essentially the party faithful for the PNM that decided not to vote. The rank and file, the hardcore of the PNM that decided not to vote.
All right. So we have Peter. I don't know how much more time you have with us, but there are people who want to perhaps engage you. I want
Yeah, no
people
problem.
to call, and but you give us some advance notice.
No,
But
I'm actually, yeah, I have to leave to go back to the airport. I'm in a different part of France today. So, but I have been given I will be given a signal when it's time. So,
All
but
right.
now we're on good ground.
Great. So let's invite our listeners, those who wish to comment and those who wish to ask a question. The number is 457-9994 is the number. It's also the WhatsApp number. So send us a WhatsApp message if you wish to ask engage Peter, or call us. Somebody was calling a while ago. In the meantime, Joel, yes?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question, and this is I'm regionalizing the question, and but using Trinidad as a base.
Yeah.
We have this situation where Keith Rowley resigned as prime minister, although I don't understand why he stayed on as leader of the party, but he resigned, so he was on his way out, if not out. And you've found cases in the Caribbean where parties that incumbent administrations lose when you find the prime minister is either resigning, indicating that this is his last go around, or he or she appear to be tired. And so on. So I'm just wondering if you to comment on that. Sometimes people read the vibes that they get from the leadership of the incumbent administration. We had it in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where virtually Prime Minister James Mitchell had indicated that he was stepping down, and he stepped down in 2000. So a new a freshman came in the person of Arnhem Eustace in late 2000, and then for the 2001 elections. We felt the sense in 1984 in St. Vincent and Grenadines that the late Robert Milton Cato, that he was tired and he couldn't control the scene, and he really was on the way out, even though that at 3 months before the election, people did not really see that there was a real genuine alternative to the Labour Party government of 1984. But Cato seemed to be tired and wanted to go out, and then the Labour Party lost badly in July of 1984. And you can have other instances that you can find throughout the Caribbean. I just wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm anxious to comment on it because part of the reason that I was really hoping that things worked out for Keith Rowley was that I like Keith Rowley's planned exit. You know, when you think about it, James Mitchell only retired because James Mitchell was beaten. I wasn't convinced when James Mitchell ran in the election before 2000 that James Mitchell's intention was to go anywhere anytime soon. But James Mitchell basically, he won a majority, but he won a majority of seats, but a minority of votes. And he got into this arrangement with Gonzalez that I think of necessity required him to retire and give way to Arne Eustace. So I think that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a bad example because I believe that in that case, he did not retire willingly. If you want good examples, you have to go to Jamaica, where PJ Patterson said, look, I served 3 terms, I'm coming out, and I'm going to give leadership to someone else. He called a national conference, they elected a leader. He went into retirement, he gave the governor to Portia Simpson Miller. To be honest, the only that was the only example that we have of a successful handover of power in any Caribbean country. In St. Lucia, where Compton also decided he wanted to retire, and he went and he found Vaughan Lewis and said to him, "Take the job. I'm going to retire." But then, of course, he came back. So the challenge that we have in the Caribbean is that as much as people say leaders ought to retire gracefully, we don't really have many examples of a situation in which a leader retired gracefully, handed over power, and kept the government because Portia Simpson Miller lost the election in Jamaica. You know, in the case of St. Lucia, Vaughan Lewis lost the government. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, even though Mitchell wasn't really planning to resign, he retired, and then of course Eustace was beaten badly after. So this would have been, to me, if it had worked out, it would have been the first example in which a leader said, I'm going to retire, I've retired, I hand over leadership to someone else, and the party is sustained. What it says to me now is clear in the Caribbean that the model of success of political parties is destabilized when the leader decides to go for whatever reason. And that is frightening because it means then that this idea that leaders should stay on in perpetuity seems to be a reality that we should face. So die in office. You know, that seems to be what the Caribbean electorate says. You made a point about Keith Mitchell, about Keith Rowley holding on to the leadership of the party. That to me was critical, and I think it was a critical shortcoming in that Keith Rowley held on to the leadership of the party largely because he didn't think that that Stuart Young could win a leadership contest within the party. He felt, as I understand, and this is not that I've spoken to him, but he seems to have felt that if you went to a leadership conference, Penelope Beckles would have won. And if Penelope Beckles won, that she couldn't win the election. So his thing was, let me rest my hand on the scale. Let me get my man, put him in office. I hope that he can sustain and that he can win the day if an election is called. The fact that he didn't essentially means now that, you know, the whole theory is blown out of the water. Years ago, it was done with Gordon Brown. I remember Tony Blair essentially, well, they argued that he rested his hand on the scale to put Gordon Brown in office as prime minister in the hope that he could save the day, but he too promptly lost the election. The Conservatives took over. So I got to think a lot about how one can successfully transition. Maybe is that leaders need to do it sooner. So if Mia Motley, for example, decides to give up leadership now, maybe she could have greater success in terms of transferring her power to somebody else. But it doesn't appear as though we have many examples. I mean, I could be wrong, Joel. I mean, I don't know if you and Cecil have any other examples that you could follow, but it just appears as though we have never had a successful transition between a leader who says, I want to go, and is able to do that, and the party still hold on to power, you know?
We have a WhatsApp question comment. I want to read it to you and have your response. The person saying, in recent elections in the Caribbean, how is voter turnout? That's a question. Are we seeing less participation in the process? And what's the average turnout we are seeing?
Mhm. It's a very good question. The challenge is that our voter turnout statistics are very unreliable because we don't know how many people who are registered are able to vote in the first place. So if I look at the St. Kitts and Nevis example, I was part of an electoral reform initiative there around 2018, I believe it was when we did it, where they had a re-registration process where the list was cleaned up. Probably about one third of the people on the list were taken off, and their voter turnout shot up to 80%. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, they had a similar process of cleaning the list, and their voter participation shot up into the 90s. My sense is that Caribbean electorates usually are in the 80s and 90s in terms of participation because the vast majority of us vote. It's only the Jehovah Witness, or maybe you find a few disgruntled people that don't vote. The problem is that our lists are always cluttered with a lot of dead people and people who went overseas, people who left St. Vincent and go and live in America, have no intention of coming back, but their names are there. Or alternatively, they're gone to America in the day and their names are still on the list. You know, the last election we had in Barbados, both of my parents were on the list, and my parents have long since gone into the great beyond. But that's a part of it. It's an electoral management issue. But I believe that instinctively you see 80s and 90s is where the Caribbean should be. But because the lists are congested with people who can't vote, the numbers that we are seeing are the 50s and 60s. And but what is more important is that there is a significant downward trend in relation to participation, even with those low numbers. So when I look at St. Vincent and I look at recent elections, the COVID election is a bad example because a lot of people by necessity could not vote. But in other elections across the region that we're seeing recently, the downward trajectory is that a lot of people are not participating. We did a focus group in Barbados a few months ago to try and find out from people in a particular area if they would vote and if not, why not. And one of the interesting points that people were making was that they weren't going to vote in many instances because they didn't think it would make a difference because they knew the outcome would not change regardless of whether they voted or not. And the other thing a lot of people said was that voting is very old fashioned. I sit down on my computer and I pay my taxes. I live in France, and I pay taxes in Barbados. Land tax, and renew my license, and I do all kind of things in Barbados on a daily basis. I conduct a radio program in Barbados. But if I want to vote, I gotta go home and stand up in a queue, sometimes for hours, to put an X.
And you have to be there for 6 months prior?
You're supposed to be there for 6 months, yeah. Well, you're supposed to be there for 6 months before you vote, yeah. That's just supposed. Um, but let's leave that one off for now.
Yeah, for now, yeah.
But you gotta be there in person. And I'm saying that I'm an extreme case because I'm not actually in the state, most of the time. But if you look at the average person that we spoke to in the focus group, they're saying to me that they're not comfortable with the idea that they gotta go and line up to vote and put an X on a paper and that type of thing. Um, that is interesting because my sense is that there are a lot of intentions that are of similar mind, that they want to go and work and come home and they're going to have a coffee after work or have a drink and whatnot. But this idea of standing up in a line to vote is not something that a lot of people are comfortable with. In Cayman Islands, they have introduced voting by text, right? Because their population is also very itinerant. The voting by text has become extremely popular because people just like the fact that they can put the vote and just sign it and go along with the business. And the day when election comes, they can have other ways of entertaining themselves. In the United States of America, postal voting has become increasingly popular because it allows people to receive a postal ballot, vote at home, put the X, send it back in, and they can sit down election day and watch television. That's a challenge that we have to face in the Caribbean because this voting X thing in an environment where everybody is online is something that people are beginning to find increasingly problematic, and they're only going to do it if they have a fundamental reason to do it because they believe that they can change something. If they can avoid it, a lot of people just won't be bothered. And I know young people in St. Vincent are increasingly feeling the same way too. That's my sense. You know?
Yes, the thing is though that I have found for the last couple of elections that the lines are only long, relatively speaking, in the morning.
Morning.
In the morning,
Mm,
early.
mm,
And by midday, you might just meet
mm,
two or three persons ahead of you, and so on. So,
mm,
but depends very much on the arrangement with your workplace and where you live.
mm.
Some because in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have persons who live and work in an area that is significantly distant, a
Precisely.
distance away from their polling station. And
I want to ask Peter: do
Mm.
you figure that was a factor in the Trinidad elections?
Of course it was, yeah. Yeah, of course it was. Because again, PNM supporters that are not excited were asked to go and stand up in a queue or vote and they're not interested. So they're saying, if you give me I get an extra hour and there's a few more drinks I can have, or I can lay down and sleep for a little longer, I can watch an episode of some movie that I want to watch on Netflix. So that's exactly the point, that it is not something which seems to come naturally anymore. And Joel, you're right. What we always do, and I imagine that on the ground in St. Vincent, what people do is the morning vote is the real people who want to participate in the election. People are not going to leave work and come home and vote. They're going to go and do it, and then they're going to go to work, so they can get into work late, but they're usually committed in that way. Invariably, the ones that vote in the afternoon is just a situation where the candidate goes through the list and they see that there's certain people that haven't shown up, and they either call them on the phone or they send a car for them and say, "Look, come and go and vote." You forget, or alternatively, people who are waiting to be incentivized. They
I
say
was just
that
going to ask
yeah,
you. I was just
right,
going to ask that question.
I will vote, but
Is that a big factor?
I waiting for the incentive. And in many cases, that will come.
Do you
Sometimes it
consider that a
doesn't.
big factor, Peter, to be
Yeah,
incentivized?
especially in the afternoon vote.
Mhm.
Joe hit the nail on the head. The voters that go in the morning are the people who are really serious about participating in this thing. The afternoon voters are, a lot of them are incentivized. A lot of them are encouraged, by somebody calling and reminding and sending a car or whatnot. Um, and that's usually that's the part you have to work on. So you see the long lines in the morning because there's this level of commitment. I don't have a regular job, so invariably I usually vote around midday when things are quieter and I can just go to the polls and come back. But you old people, there's a thing. In St. Vincent that's the case. People compete to see who can get to the polls earlier. So if it opening at 6, I'm there at 5 minutes to 6 because I've been in line since 5:30. That's commitment, but that's waning now. A lot of those people aren't, yeah, they ain't about that no more. Yeah.
Yes. Jolie coming in.
yeah. Just a quick a question is the state of emergency.
Before you do, Joel, let me just remind our call listeners that the number to call is 457-9994. 457-9994. You can call us on WhatsApp or straight, or send us a message on WhatsApp. Yes, Joel, sorry.
Oh, so the 97 up there.
No, that's for the other.
Yeah. Okay. Yes,
sorry,
on the state of emergency.
sorry, Joel. Sorry, you're right. It's 457-9997.
Okay.
It's 97 and not 94. 94 is the office, really. 457-9997. Call us on WhatsApp or straight, or send us a message there on WhatsApp. Yes, Joel, sorry.
Yes. Would you like to comment as to whether or not the state of emergency had any impact on the mood of the people and the election vote turnout and election result?
I think not, but I think the issue that the state of emergency was trying to address did have that impact. Um, the state of emergency did not appear to have a profound impact on crime, and it was lifted by the time they had the election, but it didn't appear to have a profound impact on crime. So I don't believe that it was the level of inducement. But to be honest, people could have voted under a state of emergency, and I don't think it would have really made a difference because once you didn't have impact on mobility, so in other words, once the state of emergency didn't mean that people were prevented from moving around, it wouldn't have made a difference. I went to Trinidad the week before Carnival, and there was a state of emergency in place, and it was really like, I mean, the police were stopping and checking, but that's something that happens anyhow. So I don't think that anybody really noticed, and I don't believe it had an impact on people's participation and so on. Yeah.
If you were to rank, Peter, the level of importance of the issues that we've been discussing, what would you have as number one and number two?
I would say cost of living would always be number one because cost of living is in your face. Every time you go and pay a bill, cost of living is there, and that to me would have been number one. And then I guess crime would be number two. But the thing with crime is very few people are impacted by crime, contrary to popular belief. But because you hear a lot about it, it creates this perception that the country is under siege and whatnot. But if you actually ask for data, probably less than 10% of the population is impacted on crime directly. But they hear the stories and the neighbors and so on, and as a result, they feel threatened. But cost of living, every time you swipe your card, it impacts on you because you see the price of a good, and it is something that I think it freaks people out. So yeah, I would say that's the number one issue of concern. Also, incidents in the Grenadines, the number one issue of concern.
The question of social media, the use of social media in the campaign, what role or how significant a role was that in the process?
Yeah, big. Both sides would have used it. I think the UNC used it more effectively, and social media continues to be big. Not only in terms of the organized social media where you have the messaging by the parties using the TikTok, Facebook, the Instagram, but also the influencers, you know, um, myself included. I think that not in Trinidad case, but in more at the regional level, I think the views of influencers are usually a lot more important because there are influencers in Trinidad, or a lot of them on both sides, that had the audiences very hyped and so on in relation to either strong pro or anti-government messages. So social media it's growing. It continues to be big and is growing. I think it challenges the mainstream media in terms of its importance, and it's hugely influential, especially among younger people in the election campaign.
Joel?
This is post-election comment. Do you have now that it appears that Penelope Beckles will now lead the PNM and the affairs of the PNM for maybe for the foreseeable future? What is your view about Penny in the first instance? And I got a comment from a relative in Trinidad, which basically indicates that Penny is not as charismatic as you'd want to be. She's not very active or engaged on social media. That was the comment of a young cousin. That whenever she's at an event, she's somewhere in the background or in a corner and so forth. So, what do you think? What role how do you think that she can reorganize the PNM from the helm and get them back on a particular footing?
Yeah, I like Penelope Beckles, in the same way that she has a lot in common with the new leader of the NNP in Grenada. Um, women, solid women, intelligent women, bright women, women that are committed to the party and that will work hard for the party, but women that you're not going to pick up your sack and follow as easily, and this is the reality, and I think that your relative hit the nail on the head. And there's nothing wrong with Penny. Yeah? I mean, she's not corrupt or dishonest or anything. So she's intelligent and she's progressive. The problem is that she don't have the sizzle in terms of the charisma. That, in my view, Stuart Young seemed more able to be able to cultivate and develop. You know, I mean, Stuart Young take off his shirt and go on the beach and take pictures and put on line and stuff like that. He can do that. Penelope Beckles, I don't think
Yeah.
that she has that. So what I think is going to be interesting is if she can use that to harness support, if she can harness the support of the same Stuart Young and perhaps even latent support for Keith Rowley and see if she can, use that muscle to get the PNM back on track. And it is entirely possible that the PNM faithful will say, okay, well, if she's the person in the helm, that they will come back and support her. But I think that she needs to make sure that Stuart Young is central to her fight, and others who are more charismatic and so on, is central to her fight to come to the fore. But left to her own devices, she's going to struggle. And it's the same thing with as I said, the new leader of the NNP, where I am not convinced that she is naturally someone that people will say, yes, yes, I can pick up and follow her.
Yeah.
Um, I have to say this also, and please take this in the best possible way, that across the region, women have always had this challenge, yeah, that we tend to define leadership in masculine terms, right? And it's one of my areas of research as a political analyst, not as opposed to so much, but I've done papers and so on in terms of gender, and the reality is that across the region we define leadership in masculine terms, and as a result, most of the leaders we've had are men. And then when you look at the women that have come through, there's an aggression of a Mia Motley, an aggression of a Portia Simpson Miller, even
Or
an
Eugenia
aggression of
Charles.
a Eugenia Charles, precisely right, where you get that coming through, but it's almost as though the person has the more masculine aggression. And I'm not being nasty when I say this, but the more masculine aggression that they associate with a Ralph Gonzalez or with a Keith Rowley. Um, the women who don't have that tend to struggle, and I think that unfortunately Penelope Beckles is going to be one of those people. Cameron Pasabas, Essa definitely has it. She has that aggression and so on, but Penelope Beckles less so. So she's going to struggle, but ultimately the PNM is an awesome machine. If she can get those working with her to rebuild it, they can have a good chance in the next election to be able to regain the ground that they've gained. And all of those hardcore people who drifted away from them may very well come back. I look at the election in 1986, which was a far more horrible defeat for the PNM than this one, and the PNM came back in one election term. The coalition collapsed and the PNM came back. So it's entirely possible that they can come back from this. So I look to see what Penny does, and if she has the capacity to pull the coalition together of forces, she can probably do it. But yeah, she can have some challenges. Yeah.
Is there a role in Caribbean politics at the helm for, well, maybe it's a rhetorical question, for because you have persons who are not the masculine aggressive type of which you just spoke, but for like a Philip Pierce St. Lucia or Dickon Mitchell of Grenada, a Frondell Stewart from Barbados and so forth. Is there a place for them at the helm of power in the Caribbean as well? Can they make it and stay there for a while?
But you didn't mention Kenny Anthony.
Uh, Kenny Anthony.
Yeah, Kenny Anthony. I prefer Kenny Anthony to Frondell Stewart. I think Frondell Stewart was a disaster, which is the same view that I had of the other Tillman Thomas and the other guy in St. Lucia who succeeded Compton. Those were, to me, I think that in terms of Caribbean leadership, those were some of the worst Caribbean leaders. Not because they were bad people, but just because they weren't effective. Um, I would say that definitely Kenny Anthony comes to mind because Kenny Anthony was not an aggressive leader, but he won 2 elections in St. Lucia and did quite well. But it works for a while, and then it comes to a point where people say, well, we want to go back to the old thing. That's one of the reasons why Dr. Gonzalez has done so well, because Dr. Gonzalez has the Bustamante aggression. but he also has the administrative competence and the intellectual thing of a Kenny Anthony. Kenny Anthony relies a lot on his administrative and his intellectual prowess, but he can't raise his voice in the way that he ought to from time to time, and that's why I would say. So I would say that at various points in time, a leader like that can do well, but it has to be a unique moment in history where the country has an opportunity to say, well, let's rebuild, like St. Lucia did when he was able to win. But it is always short-lived because I think that we like a leader that reminds us of the great leaders of old, you know.
All right. Peter, lastly, what lessons can we take away from the Trinidad electoral experience this year?
Okay, this is in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
No, just lessons. It's up to you, but I mean, I was talking about lessons generally.
Well, I must say, if we're gonna say, because St. Vincent is, I mean, this election year is St. Vincent too, so we gotta start asking these questions. Change management, I would say, and the idea of managing change and transition is key. That we still have to understand how best it is to transition from an old to a new leader, whether we like it or not. The question of how much longer Ralph Gonzalez will continue, I think, is important, and is a question that people are asking. And I certainly think that we need to look now to this model to see if transition can be managed more effectively in that sense. Trinidad and Tobago demonstrated challenges associated with managing a three-term government because the PNM has served more than 3 terms before, but clearly now, once it got to the third term, there were challenges presented. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has demonstrated how to manage a third-term government, sorry, a second-term government, a third-term government, a fourth-term government, and now perhaps even a fifth-term government. And I think that this is a lesson that's coming. And the interesting thing is that most governments that get this long would have had, well, no government has ever gone this long before, but usually you will have a landslide initially that gives you space. You've had, in the case of St. Vincent, a managed decline in terms of seats that took place after the second term, where you've had a relatively marginal government that has continued, notwithstanding for three terms. And I find that fascinating. So to me, this is a lesson here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that as a political analyst, I'm looking at to see how exactly you manage it. The Trinidad and Tobago demonstrated that a third term government in Trinidad and Tobago will have the same problems of a third term government anywhere else. So we have the idea of managing change as being one of the lessons. I think the identification of 2 key issues will be an important lesson that a government will lose on the economy and crime. They can lose on the economy and crime regardless of how popular they are. So that's a lesson I think that we have to learn, which is also relevant again to St. Vincent because those issues will come to the fore in St. Vincent. And then the communication, within the context of, you know, Facebook and Instagram, social media, managing a campaign that, as Joel said, speaks to the person and says what is in it for me, that does not appear to be aloof, that does not appear to set a leader aside. I think that those would be the key things which we would see emerging in that conversation. So I would say that those would be the lessons. The other thing I'm thinking about is the fact that a low voter turnout can have a landslide impact in the way that a high voter turnout can come out. Because I compare 86 to this. 86 had a high voter turnout and a higher than the election before. So people came out to vote out the PNM in 86. People stayed home to vote out the PNM in 2025. And that comparison, I think, is an important lesson because there's a different dynamic in each instance, but it is clearly equally as impactful in that regard. So, in short, those would be my critical lessons that I would say would learn, and I do believe that you can learn a lot from those issues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as you attempt to chart your course forward for this electoral campaign. But I must tell you, I am I'm really really excited and keen to see how this one will work out in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because all of the records have been broken, all the models have been broken, and in a sense, it's emerged as a model in and of itself. How to make it work.
That's the question.
And it's ironic that your prime minister is one of the foremost professors of political science in the Caribbean. In a previous career,
Yes.
I would have written about a lot of these things, and now it is that we are getting to watch it,
It's
firsthand.
live.
So
Live and
yes,
direct.
I learned at the feet of the master.
Yes, I have the question in terms of the leadership. While it's not exactly the same when
Mhm.
looking at Stuart Young versus Kamala Prasad Bisesa in the St. Vincent context, and the lesson to be learned, because we had put it out there quite often that leadership, or the leader, the political leader, matters a great deal in Caribbean politics. How would you say that apply in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
Oh
In the
yeah, for sure, for sure. No, I've always argued all across the world, the Westminster system, we have replaced a king with a prime minister. And we like to look towards a prime minister as we would look towards a king. So ultimately, the popularity, the, these are national elections. And anytime I've done surveys and asked people what they're voting for, party support, party loyalty, and the prime minister, they're usually one and two. So yeah, leadership is absolutely important. And people will compare leaders, they will compare leaders. And I think in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, not only will they compare leaders, but they will compare potential leaders, because I think that that part of the conversation also emerges as well.
What about the actual candidate who running in a particular constituency? Where would he or she sit in the pecking order in terms of importance? You just mentioned party support, party loyalty, and
No, slow down, slow down.
low down.
Yeah, low down. I mean, leader part in constituency representatives can grow. They can grow over time. But at first blush, you choose a party, you choose a government, you choose a leader, and fairly low down on the totem pole is the question of the preferred representative, because the representatives can't do nothing unless the party is in power. Remember Mia Motley won. She lost her first election campaign, and she lost her first election campaign to a guy who wasn't even a minister. So I would think that it demonstrates that leaders can grow over time and evolve. Sorry, that MPs can grow and evolve, because her seat is not the safest in Barbados. But at the same time, to get your foot in the door, yeah, leadership. The question of leadership is far more important than constituency representative. But there may be some wiggle room there in terms of a good representative, but it's going to be challenging. You look at Grenadines, um, I think Grenadines might be different, and in the Grenadines, the smallness of those places will mean that you can have a candidate that bucks the trend. But in the large majority of cases where you're talking about thousands and thousands of voters, it's not going to make a difference. But Grenadines, the BVI, I've seen it in Barbuda as well, where a candidate's personal relationship with people, it can make a huge difference in those instances. But not in places with electors as constituencies as large as these.
Mhm. And going back to the question of leadership, and would you say it's the deliverability of the leader
Or the potential deliverability.
or potential to deliver? Well, I'm not sure about potential. People see and they touch and they feel and they see what has happened. So so Peter, we talk about leadership, which is a little bit abstract, but to make it more grounded and concrete, would you say the deliverability of the leader?
When you say deliverability, what do you mean? Whether we feel that the leader can deliver.
Basically, and the ability of the leader to deliver.
Mhm. Well,
Well,
maybe the
I know in the case of
believability.
Trinidad, the now new prime minister in the campaign leading up to the elections made a number of sweeping statements in terms of what they're going to do, what the government is going to do. Now
Yeah.
the question is, in terms of
Do
going
people
forward,
believe her? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I think that the believability factor was less important than the dislike factor on the other side. Because I want to believe that the majority of Trinidadians don't actually think she can do a lot of those things. And
Oh,
I
okay.
believe that a lot of people would have supported her notwithstanding because the focus on Rowley. So I think that that may very well have been it. There was a question in the last election in Barbados where Mia Motley was proposing certain things. And she had this phrase that said, "Give me your vote and watch," right?
Okay.
Because she was proposing, things like that. But when I look at her shopping list, she said she's gonna deliver what 20 garbage trucks and 10 buses, and there was a lot of things that not that hard to do.
Mm.
So she was able to say, she checked off those items. The big ticket that she had to deliver was the restructuring of the economy and the rescheduling of the debt. And that was also achieved, not in 60 days, but it was achieved within 100 days by going to the IMF. Um, I'm not convinced that this is the case with Kamala Persad-Bissessar because her pledges as you said, they were pretty sweeping, and so I don't think that I think the believability is a factor, but I think in her case, the believability was second to the dislike for the other side. You know.
Yeah, again, a colleague in Trinidad actually indicated to me, and he supported PNM, but he
Mhm.
referred to Keith Rowley. Forgive me, Mr. Dr.
Mhm.
Rowley, when he referred to you as an obnoxious pit bull, and he voted for PNM. So that just speaks to the whole thing about likability or lack of.
But you remember, I don't know if you remember, because Joel, you were close to this thing. When Patrick Manning used to attack Keith Rowley and they used to call him the Raging Bull, you
Yes,
know? The suggestion that he was the pit bull of the PNM was a Patrick Manning thing. And Patrick Manning always said that he was afraid of him because he was like a pit bull. Which is effective sometimes, but it comes to a point sometimes where people find it offensive, and I think that that's the challenge that he faced. But a lot of that offensiveness, the pit bullishness type of characterization was put on him from within the PNM. A lot of people in the PNM felt he was too aggressive for the job. You remember there was an incident in which they call it tea room incident where it is alleged that he cussed somebody in the tea room of Parliament and threw a teacup at them and that kind of thing. All of it wasn't true. Well, I don't think any of it was true, quite frankly. But people believed it,
believe
and when Mazio Pandey made that infamous statement that politics has a morality of its own, it was related to that because Gillian Lucky, as part of the Committee on Privileges, cleared him of any wrongdoing in that regard. But regardless of what they said, the vast majority of people in Trinidad say, yeah, that's not like Keith Rowley. That's not like something like Keith Rowley would do because he's that kind of a pit bullish character. So I agree with you that it was there are a lot of people in there that had a dislike for him. He won and he did well for the two times that he was there, but um, perhaps he could have gone earlier, or perhaps he should have gone earlier. I don't know.
or call the election a little bit later.
Later. Mm.
Th-
Well,
That's been
young,
suggested
young.
too that he should have given. Well, that no, not him. That thing should have given himself. Stuart Young should have given himself more time. My personal feeling is that Stuart Young called it when he did because Stuart Young was concerned about going into an election in 6 months' time, which is the same concern I have for Sir Vincent and the Grenadines. That when you go into an election when the US economy is in recession, it's extremely difficult for you to do anything. The lifeline for Trinidad and Tobago and economy was the Dragon deal. The Dragon deal has fallen off, and you're in a situation where you have to battle an increasing cost of living and dwindling reserves and resources, and then you got to fight an election on top of that. So my feeling is that the euphoria of the PNM in power, he hoped it would carry him over the line because he was close to the Ministry of Finance and understood what the reality would be like in 6 months. I honestly think in 6 months they would have been facing a 1986 style defeat because I don't believe that they could impact on those issues. You can't change crime. Crime will be a problem for many years to come. And you can't fix the economy or bring down the cost of living, especially when Trump is promising tariffs that will make your life a lot harder. So,
All right, Peter, we have to thank you very much. We don't want to abuse the
problem.
generosity of your time. So we thank you very much for sharing with us on the program this morning. And we are hoping we can call in you again sometime when it is necessary in the future.
When your election is called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Cecil and Joel, I don't know if y'all realize that I really enjoy the conversation because I do think that we do too little of this in the Caribbean where we discuss each other's elections in a slightly less politically polarized environment. So I enjoyed having these chats with you because I do feel there's a lot that we can learn, as we lean on each other and try to understand what what this whole Caribbean civilization is all about politically.
Mhm.
So thanks again for the invitation, and I'm happy that I was able to spend the first hour with you.
Thank
All right,
you.
all the best.
And all the best to you. And have a safe flight.
All right, take care.
All right,
Thank you.
then. Good,
Bye.
good, good. All right. So yes, that was Peter Wickham with us this morning, distinguished and well-known Caribbean post and social and political scientist. Joel, what are some of the questions, follow-up thinking we may wish to get into? And let's now urge all those who've been listening to the conversation, please call us if you wish to make a point, if you wish to give your own sense of of your own analysis and what it means for us here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The number to call is 457-9997. That's the WhatsApp connection as well as the street connection. Call us and we will see how we can exchange our views on those issues that arose from the discussion with Peter. Yeah, Joel.
I have, which we didn't discuss, and this is maybe perhaps not the best forum, but the concern as to what approach, what direction that the new prime minister and her cabinet will want to take Trinidad and Tobago over the next year or two in particular. And is it going to given her comments in relation to linking and looking at the policies of the Conservative Party in the United States right now, what will take place in relation.
But by the way, sorry to cut, but is it true that the prime minister, the new prime minister in Trinidad, received a call from Vice President Vance yesterday? Somebody said it was on the news.
Oh, I'm not aware. I'm just aware.
Okay.
I'm just aware of the congratulatory
from
the
Secretary of State, yeah,
Marco Rubio.
Somebody I said the call was made. I don't know how true it is. I thought you might have known.
Yes, and then there's this story about the special link between the UNC party and the Barra Jagdeo factor in Guyana. I'm not speaking necessarily of President Irfan Ali per se, but I'm speaking about the Barra Jagdeo factor and so on. And that kind of link, and what would it mean to the rest of the Caribbean? And then the reorientation to reaching out more to India for links and way to support, and what would it mean to the overtures that the CARICOM was making towards Africa in recent times and so forth. So what would all of that mean? And just generally the solidifying and integration of the Caribbean region. And so you want to get a feel as to what is happening. And I hope that we can stand together, even though that the CARICOM affairs as a part, it may seem like a title, and it has been there since the start of the CSME days and so forth. That I would like, for example, to all governments actually have declared a ministry of CARICOM affairs, even if it is part of foreign affairs and so forth on that. And that we can really just, not just in title alone, that we live it out in a true way and so forth, and that it means something. I still find it difficult. I can go to Barbados now and I'm hardly checked at the airport in Barbados. I go straight through, there's not a big thing going to Barbados. Not as an OECS citizen, it's not a problem going to Grenada, St. Lucia, and so forth. But going to Trinidad, you still have to fill out all these papers, and there are lots of questions being asked to make sure that where you're staying and who you're staying with, and what's the phone number, and so forth.
Joel, we have a question. Let's see. Sorry, a call. Let's take it. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Why is it?
Sir.
To all the panelists and the
Yeah, this
invitation.
is Stepin. Is it Stepin?
Yes, but not the
What-
razor.
I know. All right. But why is it every time you call, we have to ask you to turn your volume down or move away from the device?
Because
you should know that.
Be close to me better than I don't know.
But before you call, you should turn it down and then you make your call. Because
So it's still getting trouble there?
it just did, but it's all right. You say it's close to your bed. You're in your bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
your
let me just say
circumstances.
hello to
Yeah,
a
okay.
man sick and culture man and one sir and Winston and I didn't.
And you're assuming that they're all listening to the program.
Yes. We don't listen to the program. Regular listeners.
Okay.
Don't miss the program at all.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So we join you in saying hi to them, by the
Let me
way.
just tell.
We join you in
Hello?
saying hi. We join you in greeting them.
Yes. And Tony Banks. So let me just say that with Rowley and Peter Wickham. Peter Wickham was so right in all the ways when he talk about petrotrim and all this kind of thing. And Tech Bull. And I want to tell the opposition that not because they hear that business are getting office, get back in leadership, that them is a part of that because she Camilla Bissetta was a politician and a real opposition. You know, not like where they have telling lies and all kind of things and carrying on just because they want to get in government. But I want to tell the world and the country that Camilla Bissetta was a better leader than Rowley by a million miles. And I have a partner in America, Gomery, go like to hear me say that. But why I say that, Gomery, this woman have what it takes to be a leader. But you know why she was out of office? Because Rowley pet boldness and the aggressiveness, and he couldn't exactly carry on the right like what Camilla Prasad was doing. You know Camilla Prasad? She, when she was in office,
Step in on what basis
I problem with the Clico and Baiko. You know, she end up give a couple $1 million. We government try to pay back the people them that keep Clico and Baiko owe. And Rowley coming right, they couldn't make that. Rowley couldn't make that because what happened? He figured that he don't know what he's doing. He don't know, and he couldn't care from where we left off from the woman. So the woman was a better and a firm leader than Rowley, and Kenya and Trinidad in a better way. And the people them but he put you up because of racial thing like the Indian and Negro and all kind of thing. But I tell you, she was a better and a more firm leader than Rowley. And Rowley get in there because the petfulness and the aggressiveness, just like some NDP want to get in civil. So how about them about that?
But you just go on, so you're not waiting for us to engage you?
Yeah, engage me, man, engage me.
Yeah, Joel, you wanted to respond to him?
I'm not so sure if he's speaking about the same Kamala Bissessa who was the Prime Minister of Trinidad between 2010 and 2015. Yeah. So I'm the same person who virtually, as we said earlier on in the program, she had lots of challenges among her cabinet and virtually had to replace 14 of her.
He's still online, eh? Stephanie still online. He has a challenge. Bear in mind that he doesn't have a lot of credit. And
okay. Ministerial and so forth. And then there was accusations of corruption after corruption in her administration. Back then. And then her own personal proclivities, if I may use such a term. Back then, where we knew what transpired, and she had to be propped up literally and figuratively on many an occasion. So I'm not too sure whether it's the same person who said that Trinidad will not be the ATM for the rest of the Caribbean and so forth, you know. And but Step in is entitled to his
Step in.
Yes.
You disagree with?
Well, I at least you see that Camilla Prasad said that Trinidad going to be ATM for West Caribbean.
No, well, all that Joel has said. He said
Yes.
Mona. He said she ran a very well. She was over a corrupt machinery.
So her administration,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I don't think it is kept down so far in corruption and all kind of things because we see that she fire a set of people who she figure was involved in corruption and all kind of thing. Maybe it continuously put that on her wholeheartedly, but she was fighting corruption too because she fired a set of people out the party and to say well that she eating that not an ATM for no country. But she how you look at how you interpret that she gave to Prime Minister money to help out with the people who get trapped in Clico. How you differentiate the two things, the same from the giving and was continue to give the money before and then she lose her face.
I need to be clear on that because I'm not too sure if at the time whether or not it was actually the Kamala Prasad Bisesa who had done so, or whether or not it was the PNF. But in any event, I'm just making a point. Just going back to the question of CARICOM. CARICOM virtually is, as you know, it's an arrangement among other things for the free movement of goods among the participating member countries, and there was no tax at the port or limited tax depending on the special preferential arrangements that were applicable to the lesser developed countries, in the OECS and Belize and so forth. So but Trinidad, if you go to a supermarket today and you look for Caribbean made products, you're going to find the vast majority are made in Trinidad, and they entered St. Vincent and the Grenadines free of duty, so on. In terms of financial institutions, banking, insurance, and so on, they are by and large owned by Trinidadian outfits. You look at distribution companies and retail companies in like the Massey supermarkets and so forth in St. Vincent and the rest of the Caribbean, they're owned by Trinidadians, and on we can go. And so I'm just saying that Trinidad was actually benefiting a great deal from the whole CARICOM experience. And then to say that in certain situations that if the less fortunate may require some kind of support in one way or another, that say no, that basically more or less accusing us of being beggars and so forth. And I just thought that, to be honest, was a bit below, something that.
All right, step in.
Well. So therefore, you talk about where the click on boycotting, and you don't know if was a Rowley party before what was orchestrating that. But tell me something. If Rowley party was orchestrating that, how come Rowley didn't continue? Bisa they continue. They take it up and thing. But with the part with the goods and servicing and no tax, trade goods and thing. Rowley could rectify that, but
no, we don't want it. We don't want Rowley to rectify. We don't want to say that goods made in Trinidad must be dutiable in St. Vincent. We don't want that. That's not what CARICOM is about. We want that to prevail, but we just got to recognize that we are in this thing together, that we have to take an integrated and united front on a number of issues that impact us regionally and extra-regionally. So we just got to deal with it together, but we don't think that necessarily that Trinidad should be paid duty because they have an advantage.
So step in. You support the re-election of Kamala Bisesa? No, well, it's not because I'm over. The point is that she is now the new prime minister in Trinidad and should be running the affairs.
And I think she'll do a better work.
So you support it? So you support it?
Yes.
All right, okay.
I think she'll do a better work.
All right then. Well,
Uh-huh.
all right. Thanks for
Okay.
calling. I don't want to hold you on much longer.
No, you could have tell me something, anything
No,
I
no,
can
it's all
add.
right. It's okay. All right, step in. Have a good day.
Mhm.
All right then. Good. Interesting. Take.
I wanted to share an experience I had some time ago. I went to St. Lucia to try and get a Schengen visa. That's just before we allowed that the Schengen visa was no longer required.
We have calls lining
Yeah,
up.
okay,
Right?
go
So
ahead. Go ahead. I'll
let's
come
see.
in afterwards.
Yes. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program. Good afternoon.
Hello?
Hello, you're on the program.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Greetings.
Yeah, Joel was saying about the security at Piaco Airport.
Security?
Level of security.
No. You heard wrong.
Yeah.
You misunderstood what you were saying. But anyway, Joel, you want to just clarify?
Yeah, actually, maybe it ties them about it. They're saying, by and large, I mean, there's relative ease for Vincentian citizens to travel to Barbados these days, and so on. Yes, you are.
No, I'm talking about Trinidad.
Yeah, I know. I'm just making the case with Barbados, St. Lucia, Grenada. But in terms of Trinidad, it's in terms of entering Trinidad as a non-national of the CARICOM region, it's still a lot of challenges. And I was making a point actually that I went to St. Lucia to try and get a visa, and and this is some years ago, but I was rerouted on my way back through Barbados, and then I only had an ID because I had to leave my passport in St. Lucia. And then when I got to Barbados, they sent the flight to Trinidad before coming back to St. Vincent. When I got into Trinidad, I was threatened of being arrested and so on. What am I doing there in Trinidad? And I just explained that it's not, I was only going back to St. Vincent from St. Lucia and so forth. And to me, I was a bit scared as to what could have prevailed in Trinidad as a result. But fortunately, someone from the airline bailed me out before anything got untoward.
So that's the question.
Well, I
That's the
want to
issue.
talk about exit in Trinidad. I want to talk
Oh,
about
exit. Go ahead.
exiting.
Go ahead. Make your point, please.
So one time I was coming to St. Vincent. I go to the layout line and a security guy came and he wanted to see my passport and he asked a couple of questions. I can't remember all the questions he answered. When I'm coming back to Trinidad, I see him upstairs. He was down upstairs, him and another guy. And I said to the other guy, I said to him, I said to the other guy, that's the guy that interrogated me when I was coming through. So the guy said he didn't interrogate you. He just had a conversation with you. And the guy said, you're traveling frequently. The other guy said that. But I've seen dogs at the airport when you're in the line.
But what is the point you're making? What is the point you're making? Trying to follow it.
Well, the level of security at Piaco. The level of security at the Piaco airport.
It's heavy or what? It's tight?
I think it's kind of heavy when when you're already checking down, when you're already checking upstairs and you're in the departure lounge before you get on the plane, there's pull in and sort your second time.
All right. Well,
I remember one time I came through there and all right, when I reached the JFK, there was a red ribbon on my suitcase, which I didn't put there. And I was interrogated at JFK.
Well, there must be a reason that's the internal security, which we can't question here.
Were you traveling from St. Vincent, Trinidad, then to New York?
One time it was St. Vincent, Trinidad. The other time it was straight Trinidad to New York.
Well, maybe because even here in St. Vincent AIA, that they select persons. I can't tell you whether it's at random or not, but they select persons for a second, or let me call it a secondary check after you check at AIA.
But you see, what his particular observation is that he was interrogated in Trinidad, and then his baggage was. Hold on. Let me finish. You were interrogated in Trinidad by the security people, and then your bag was, when you got to JFK, it had a red tag on it, and the JFK people, the US people, interrogate you further. That's what you said.
There's two other things.
That's
There
what
were
you
two
said,
others,
right?
though.
So it means that
I
they
said
may
that,
have
but-
been checking on whatever particular thing. We can't address that issue here in the program. All right?
But there were two other times too as well.
No,
All
no,
right.
we can't address
All right, bye.
those issues on the program.
I
Sorry.
know. Okay, sorry. Bye-bye.
All right, good.
All
Bye.
right, bye.
That's to do with his travel itinerary, not for public interest, really. All right, so a number of people are trying to get in, and we still know he's still here. But we have a call now. Let's take this one. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Hey, hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
I did listening attentively.
Sorry,
we
repeat.
come this phone. You hear me?
You what? You're listening
Attentively.
attentively.
Attentively. We come what they're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, but he makes some good points anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But then Trinidad have a fault all the way from in the 60s come up.
A fault?
when
You said Trinidad have a fault?
Yeah, but
Okay.
let me tell you what I mean.
Okay.
From the 60s when we get to have the federation, right? You go wrong by this place, we pass in, it's not doing it, let us still do it. Send for DNA testing and things, Federation Park. And you see all the things that attend the Federation was to come in. All the names, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Grenada, St. Lucia, all the name of the country them. But then with Trinidad would have been better off if they were doing the Federation with the Caribbean. But what they did really, they tell themselves, well, they had oil and thing, and they believed that we would have leaned on them so much that, and them didn't want any weight. The same as Pamela said, they may no ATM card for nobody. Right? So then, Sparrow me saying a tune if they knew they didn't want federation, you know. That was in the 60s. Because I go to Trinidad in 1979 after the suffering, and I come back here in 1992. I spent 13 years there.
But the Sparrow song was really targeted to Jamaica, not he was asking that question of Jamaica. But go ahead.
Right?
This Sparrow song that you referred to.
When I William Nam and them ignored the thing where they talk about the federation because they had all the name on them.
No, you listen to me. You said you referred to the Sparrow song. And the Sparrow song was, if they know they didn't want federation, they meaning Jamaica. That was what Sparrow song about.
Oh, well, okay, sorry then. Well, he mean that they want included Jamaica in the federation too then.
Let's not go on and no. It's a different thing. Let's not. I don't want to break the trend of the discussion by going into that. That's something else.
Okay, well, let me finish up by saying that.
Yes.
Professor, when you sent Wam Keith while he gone, she gonna be winning because Trinidad and them have better opposition. We have any opposition here. All they go for is pull down and them ain't pulling up and no, just keep pulling down. Ralph this, Ralph that. When you ask them what they're going to do, vote for where you're going to see.
But isn't that what the UNC was doing? Isn't that what Kamala Prasad-Pissesa's party was doing when they were in opposition and recent opposition?
No.
Pulling down the PNM?
No, talking about here.
No, I'm just making, okay, go ahead.
No, well, if you want to say that if them did pulling down, I didn't hear nothing about that pull down. You could be hearing because you think, I didn't hear about that pulling down, but I listened to the election the other night right through. But like the campaign and thing, when I was in Trinidad, when I have the election, I used to be around Chuck, Dos and all them fellas in Trinidad. Because in them time, the Chuck, Dos was this guy, they took, I forget the guy name, he been used to they wrong them fellas. He didn't know PNM neither nor the Kamala Prasad them people. Because I know for sure she got to win. Because the guy didn't have enough time for settle down for spend a year or wherever for the people them see his potential. You know what I mean? So then if he just get over leadership, the leadership they come like the leadership come like Eustace own. Yeah. Can he get about what, 4 or 5 months before he call the election?
No, days, matter of days.
Well, right, but that was showing you, and you know that too. That mean that you can't change the price of the fish. The fish remain the same because if he had some months or a year or what, a year and a half, to solve the people and for the see his potential, he might have had a chance. Do you agree with me?
Yes, well, although it was said by Mr. Wickham that he had a chance between calling it now or waiting for 6 months or so. But
it was too soon, but
no, but
he must be telling himself that since the face the leader change, he gonna think by car get to understand he lose his seat too, right?
Stuart,
No.
Stuart Young did not.
He didn't lose his seat.
Okay. Well, I only asking because somebody is saying so the playing field.
But yes, but thanks, Brad, for your contribution.
Okay,
all right. Incidentally, we've been advised that the BICO payment was done by Manning. I'm not sure.
Well, that was my initial answer. It was, but 2010. Anyhow.
We can check it out. But preliminary, that's my understanding.
Of course, we argue that perhaps it was inadequate anyhow.
Could be.
That Trinidad government as a whole.
We have a call.
Should have done more.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, my friend. I know tuning. I don't know what I was talking about.
Well, then why do you? Then why are you calling if you don't know what you're talking about? Who is it though? Who is it? Who is it?
It's Mr. Baptiste from Sandy.
Mr. Baptiste, you were supposed to call us, call the station and give your full name. You never did last week.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Minister Brown followed up your issue and she wanted to get your full name. You didn't. But give us your name now.
Yeah, my name is Francisco Baptiste.
Sound very Spanish. Francisco. Spell it.
F-R-A-N.
Yes.
F-R-A-N.
Go ahead.
C-I-C-I-S-C-O.
Okay. Francisco Baptiste Sanderby. Did you get back to the ministry?
No.
All right. So I'll pass on your name.
Well,
I'll pass your name on to Minister Brown, and and she hopefully also your number because it's something that I can see your number. I have your number. Don't worry. I have it.
All right. Okay.
It's showing up on our screen.
All right.
So yes, but you called for something else today. Are you calling for something else today?
Yesterday?
No, today. Why you're calling now? You're going to contribute to our discussion?
Yes. I called, but I tune into. I find I tune into late because as I told you, I didn't know what I was saying at the same time.
Okay. We had Mr. Peter Wickham on with us, and we were talking about the Trinidad and Tobago elections.
Okay. But I find the lady do a good winning in Trinidad.
Okay.
And I hope she perform.
Well, that's the question. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
We don't want this man here to say he going and farm government Friday. We don't want him at all around because he don't have the use at all.
Why are you saying that?
Yeah, because up to now, like he don't have no plan to say, well, he going and do this, he going and do that.
Do you listen to their program from time to time?
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't listen to them enough. I just almost listen to this program here every Sunday.
But now I ask you because you're saying that they don't have a plan. I was wondering if you have heard
But
anything
no,
at
but
all.
but I hear people saying so.
Or you heard other
But
people saying so?
but from now I will see if I could listen to them, because sometimes they talk a lot of nonsense too.
Based on what this
So therefore, if you know they're talking a lot of nonsense, you listen to them from time to time.
I will listen to them now.
Okay, Joel. Sorry, Joel.
Right. Okay. Have a chance.
No. Hold on. My colleague want to ask you a question.
Yeah, I would suggest, because you may or may not agree with their plan, but to say they do not have a plan, because if you listen to their programs, they would repeatedly talk about their plans. You may support, you may not support, and that is a message I would say to all Vincentians, regardless of the leaning that you may have to one party or next. That is always useful and important to listen to what they are.
Well, Joel, maybe as far as Mr. Batiste is concerned, what he's hearing is not a plan. Could well be that too.
Well, yeah, but usually we say in a thing, they may have no plan, man. That kind of thing.
Anyway.
So, but he said that he will listen. So,
all right, Mr. Batiste, thanks. I'll pass on your number to and your name to Minister Brown.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, then. Good. Bye-bye. Yes, Mr. Batiste. Interesting.
You have another caller?
Yes. There's one more here. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm good. And you?
Okay, not bad at all, please, sir.
And who it is we're talking
Damien
with?
speaking.
Mr.
Damien.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All right, Damien. Greetings and special welcome.
Yes, please, sir. I'm concerned particularly about the exit of Dr. Gonzalez.
Exit?
Yes.
He's going to exit? Sorry, go ahead. Finish.
You have to leave me. Let me get my point.
Sorry?
In terms of leadership of the Unity Labour Party, we have seen it as though it's a trend where whenever the leader exits and someone take over the party, would last election and take a while to come back. I think if at any time at all, this would have been the exact time for the Unity Labour Party to make a comeback in terms of getting the party together. Because, say, 5 years ago, I think you should have already do the transition. What would happen after he leaves? If we don't prepare now, when are we going to start? Yes, there's a lot of vibrant person there within the party who could influence the Vincentian public. But when are we going to do that?
But did you hear an announcement that he's going to leave, and when?
No, please.
Okay, so
he indicated several times that he's going to leave. Isn't that true?
What time frame are you talking about?
No. Before he would have said that this is his last election. He keeps saying that. So when would be the last?
But he did say that he would be a candidate in this upcoming election. Didn't you hear that?
He always been a candidate. He always been a candidate.
No. I know, but I'm saying for this election, which is in front of us, he did confirm that he's going to be a candidate. Then he said, didn't you hear him saying that?
Did he say that he's not going to be the leader and he's not going to carry us into the next general election? Did he say that?
You're not answering my question.
No. I'm asking you if he did say that.
No. But I'm asking, you're saying that he's not going to be leader. I'm asking you if you haven't heard him saying that he will be in this election. No. It's not a question. No. I'm asking, you haven't heard him saying that?
No, I haven't heard him saying that. No.
Oh, well, I don't know. Well, okay. I don't know. Then I can engage you because, the man is leading the the campaign. He's speaking every week on radio and he's saying the same thing. And you're saying you haven't heard that?
No. What I'm saying, so nobody else can do that? No other person in the party can do that?
Well, it's not for us, certainly not for me to say
No,
that.
that's what I'm saying.
Hold on.
If he,
Hold on.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
All right. The Unity Labour Party is a political party with a process, and they determine. I'm not a member of the party. I cannot come and tell the members of the party who to vote as their leader to take them into the next election. I may have a view, but I'm not going to say that the members should not vote for Dr. Ralph Gonsalves as the leader. Is that what you're saying?
So as a supporter of the party.
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
As a supporter of the party, and want to see the future for the party.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's doing well for the party.
Do you attend the meetings of the party?
Yes, I do.
Well, you should voice those opinions in the meeting of the party. Do you voice them? Do you voice those opinions? Do you voice those opinions at the meetings when you attend?
No, in the party.
When the party has meetings.
Together, when we do have a meeting together, we do.
Do you voice those opinions?
Yes, another person expresses the same sentiment.
All right. Well, I was talking about you, not other persons, because I haven't heard other persons. I'm hearing
but
you.
It's not me alone. It's a collective effort.
All right. Well, I'm hearing you, so I'm relating to you right now. So I can't ask about. I cannot ask the other people who you said they are.
No, but
anyway, let's. That's not it. That's not it. I don't know where that comes in the discussion this morning.
No, I'm speaking in terms of Trinidad. We have seen where Rowley leave and the new prime minister took over, and look at what happened.
No, well, the new prime minister took over. Hold on. What do you mean the new prime minister took over and look what happened? What do you mean?
Well, he lost the election.
No, Stuart Young.
Oh, Stuart Young.
Rowley transitioning
to Stuart Young. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay.
So I'm speaking about transition in St. Vincent.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have yeah, well, all right. Well, sum up, and because, we can go on and on.
Well, basically, you understand what I'm saying now. So I'll take my exit.
You're not summing up?
No, I'll take my exit. I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I hear you and I understand what you're saying, and I responded.
Okay, well, have a blessed weekend, please.
You too. Yeah, okay. So the number to call is 457-9997. You can call us there on WhatsApp, and you can call us straight if you wish to make a point in relation to the earlier discussion, which was led by Mr. Wickham, Peter Wickham. Greetings, my brother. Glad to have you.
Greetings. How you doing?
I'm good.
Joel?
Hey, greetings, man.
Okay, good. Listen, it's Chris.
Yeah, Chris.
Peter said something about when you guys probed him on it and the pecking order. And he said the party
support,
party leader, party
support, party loyalty, the party leader. And then he has the candidate down low down on the Okay, go ahead.
I know that order I disagree with him on that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, the party support, party leader. Then the man you put up in the constituency to be the standard bearer in the constituency. Yeah. But that is very critical. We could see, and I mean, when I see him, I'll challenge him on that too, because you could poll different people in a constituency and come up with different results, even though the two things at the top stay the same, because as we know, personalities could rub people the wrong way. So that part of it, I do not agree with him on that.
So Chris, why didn't you call and tell him?
Well, I mean, I was going to call, but I kept watching whether he's going to leave, whether he's going to leave, because he was on a tight role. Anyway,
yeah.
I'll catch him. But we'll have time
Chris,
to catch him again. Huh?
Just stay on the line, if you don't mind, Cecil. I would like to engage you on that, because this is the time now when the parties are either finalized or just about to finalize the slate of candidates for the upcoming elections here in St. Vincent.
Right.
I'm talking about the two main parties, ULP and NDP. And we just want to get sometimes say, well, this candidate will lose because he's not visible, or she's not visible, or he doesn't get along well with people, and that kind of thing, or this and that kind of discussion. But here it is that Peter Wickham is saying, no, but something the party as a whole, as a collective, and particularly the leader, that they're the ones who really have the influence. And you come to that with the Joshua comment from long ago, that is, if you put a broomstick to run in a particular state, that they will still vote for PPP in this particular case, But so I'm just saying.
Or the other Joshua comment, that if you're not for me, you're against me. So what I'm saying, it's I've watched it in sevens. I've watched candidates implode, right? At the constituency level. Whereas, and this may very well speak to something he was speaking about, because he was saying in that area there in Trinidad, the East-West corridor, you could see where UNC blew them out. But normally, that is very competitive.
Yes.
And the PLM people stayed at home. But we don't know if that had a lot to do with the candidates also, who they chose. If they were incumbents, did we replenish? Because I tell you why I said that. He was saying that St. Vincent blew all the models apart and we created our own model in St. Vincent. But one of the things that the St. Vincent model did is that they keep changing the standard bearers in these different constituencies. So there's a change within itself. And I don't know if when you talk to him or when I see him, if that has, that's a factor in itself, like keeping the party support even keel or not, because I certainly think it has a bigger role than he said.
Well, I share your view in a way, in that when persons vote, particularly in a swing state, and a swing seat, not swing state, a swing seat, that the candidate matters more, because if, for example, sometimes you're talking about 3 to 5% and so forth, the candidate himself or herself may have on their own have influence of, say, 10 percentage points or so, and not so much the party. And in a context like that, you really need to have a good party. I mean, if you're very well entrenched, no matter whom you may put, for example, in, well, maybe not, let me not call anything, but by and large, I'm just making a statement that candidates do matter, especially when the margin of victory may very well appear to be relatively close. So all the factors count, but candidates do matter. And especially too, that those candidates, when it is close, you can't deal with wholesale politicking. It has to be retail politicking. And I think that is where Wickham said as well, that then when you got to hit the ground, you got to meet with people, you got to let them know you know them, you know their concerns, their interests, and all that kind of thing. That is what has to be done. And that will make the difference as to whether you win by one vote or you lose by one vote.
Right. So we're on the same page with that.
Yes.
We may have to let Peter tweak his model there a little bit in Caribbean election. No,
No, but
Coming back to
didn't he say that? I thought he said that.
No, he said
No.
that in the Grenadines.
All
He
right,
was saying
okay.
maybe
All right,
when
okay.
it's small.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
it's
okay,
small,
okay.
But he said we had thousands of votes. I guess he was talking in the context of maybe Trinidad, Jamaica, where you have tens of thousands of people voting in a constituency. But in our context,
It's the same. It's the same thing, though. It's the same
I
thing.
think
No,
in a
not
way,
necessarily,
I think in a way
Yeah,
he
anyway.
said it, but he just basically, by and large, is saying that at the end of the day, the individual candidate is not as influential as the party. But when it's a close call, that individual candidate will also matter.
Yes,
right,
yeah,
because
Chris.
he said it's at the bottom, but I think it's higher than that.
Okay.
Anyway, the other thing you remember he said Simpkins is blowing the model all over the place. But the Unity Labour Party, prior to 2010, anybody who forms government, any political party who formed government in Simpkins, the town seats were critical. You couldn't form government without winning at least one in town seats. That was known throughout the narrative. I mean, I remember Kenneth John, they used to write about it. Whoever wins the town seats, and that's when man like P.H. Vera, then we put up the key or the star and have this sort of influence over the country. But since 2010, that has been blown out the water also, because the government was formed outside the town. And the way the Unity Labour Party has been structured from inception, the base of the party was built outside the town. So that is what is creating this problem in the model that he say has been blown apart.
Why you see it as a problem?
No, but is not. Well, in the models around the model he uses around the Caribbean.
Oh, you mean the difference? Okay, all right.
Yeah, because he said
It's not a problem.
It is a blown.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
he has to have that come to Jesus moment and realize this is different. This is a different kettle of fish, and that is why it is so difficult to beat this political party in and the Grenadines because of where the base is structured.
Yeah, if I may just quickly add to that, Chris, is that Kingstown is three seats out of 15, right? So which is 20%. If you go to Barbados, I mean, and it ties in with urbanization and so forth. If you go to Barbados, the St. Michael constituency, I can't tell you that many seats in that area surrounding Bridgetown and so forth. So there's a lot of seats. If you go to in St. Kitts and elsewhere as well too.
And Dominica.
Well, I'm not as familiar with Roseau, yes, and then you have to go back up to not where the airport is and so on to get the rest and so on. So as you see, that Kingstown is not impacted. It's only impacted on 3 out of 15 seats, as opposed to 2 out of 9. That's what it was in 72 or 1967. Or then became 3 out of 13 or something like that. So so you can win the Kingstown seats, but you still have to you got to go and fight 5 more. And I think that is the issue that you have. And then if you control, for example, that the eastern corridor of St. Vincent Grenadines, then you can have 7. It's about 7 that will take you from up North Windward through to West St. George. Right? And so forth. Yes. And you just basically need 1 more and so forth. So it depends very much on the movement of people. But I will just close by this one quick comment, is that urbanization and the population on the electoral list and registered voters is not necessarily a reflection of where the people live. because you could very well find a lot of people registered to vote, say, in North Leeward, but they don't live in North Leeward. And the same thing in the southern Grenadines, and they don't live there, and so on. So you have these issues, and the question is whether or not that should actually be changed.
All
right.
Well, you're 1 o'clock, so you talk again.
All right, then, Chris. Thanks for
Okay.
calling.
All right, bye.
Interesting analysis. All right. Yes, as he said, it's 1 o'clock, and we've had a long day. Well, talking. That is not in terms of hours, because we have gone longer than this in the past. But Joel, any concluding remarks?
Just to say that I enjoyed the discussion. I was glad to hear from Peter Wickham, because perhaps he, more than anyone else, is very familiar with the politics of the region and so on, even though that, as he indicates, he lives in France, but technology, you could live anywhere. Almost, and then you can still be in and so forth.
Yeah.
And I certainly would like to hear more from him. I have known him for quite a while, and he is reasonably objective. So when he speaks on a particular subject, we should listen. You may not necessarily agree, but you should listen to what he has to say, and take it from there. I think we now at the start of a particular season, election season in the Caribbean, and St. Vincent is included in the mix. And I would just want us to be as and you don't have to be objective all the way, because sometimes politics is not an objective thing, but at least I would like the degree of debate, the discussion, the analysis, and so on should be one that followed the model of this particular program today, which I thought was of a high standard, in my opinion.
But let me ask you, Joel. The in Australia, I'm sure you know that.
Yes.
The Liberals of, he has one. The Reds. In Canada.
Carney.
Yes.
And the Liberals, yes.
Yes. In Trinidad. The buck the trend in Trinidad. UNC.
Yes. Okay.
What's significant?
You mean the change of government versus parties?
Well, the parties, the party. Yeah. Well, that
or the political philosophy.
That and the political philosophy. Well, I don't know what political philosophy some of them went on. I know Trump support them a lot. There's some more like MAGA kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it is. I think sometimes they are. To be honest, I'm not too sure if anything to do, for example, the politics of Trump could very well have influenced the elections in Canada, and to some degree in Australia.
Well, the winning prime ministers, they said that.
Yes. But even though that the winning leader in Trinidad, I think the factors in impacting.
Is the opposite way?
No, it's different. They're more complex than just simply defensive of, because there was also a defense in Canada. There was a defense of the patrimony and the thing of the country of Canada, or defending what is Australian and so on. But it was not necessarily that. In Trinidad and Tobago, that was not the fight there. So I think that's a little bit different. So, but we'll see as they go on. We may actually have as many as 4 more elections in the region
before the end
within the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, well, we've had as you said, we've had a good discussion today, and we want to thank, first of all, Peter for joining and give us some interesting and enlightened points of discussion. And we also want to thank those who have contributed and shared with us here on our program this morning, listeners and followers. We thank you very much. Of course, we thank the Star FM and Garfina Radio for extending the broadcast from WEFM and East Yutan, of course. And Pijan isn't here. I'm sure he'd been listening. He sent a message earlier to say he wasn't in the spirit of coming in this morning. So I hope he's doing well, Pijan. and all those persons who sent messages and clips and so on. We thank you very much. I'm sure they've helped in our program, helped our program in one way or the other. We didn't hear some of the usual voices, but that's okay. Good to have new voices and new points of view from other people. So we thank you all, and we want to wish you a very safe week this week, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. My name is Cecil on behalf of Karen and Joel. Good afternoon.